the mountain of the Lord, and to the house of the God.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
Welcome back. We've had a 2-week hiatus where I was out of town and had some very enriching encounters with the scriptures and the things that God has for me to understand better there. And welcome to our subscribers. We're so happy to see you, and we just are so thankful that you are with us, as well as those who are here with us. So, shalom, shalom, Shabbat shalom, and we're just so happy to be back, easing back into our weekly Shabbat, Parsha, and Word. And if you recall on the last video I put up, in order to let you know that I wasn't going to be here, I said we were going to go back and we're going to keep the order and flow of the message, the spirit of the Torah. And so I said we were going to do Emor, which is speak. That's in Vyikra 21, 1 to 24, 23. And then Bahar is the next one, on Mount, chapters 25, 1 to 26, 2. And then Vekukote, by my regulations, Vyikra 26, 3 to 27, 34. And it's kind of exciting to see how the sequence of events, assembled around this parsha, or the combination thereof, 3 parshas. It has a very interesting message that Yehovah has impressed upon me, because I think we are at a time in history where everything's coming to a conclusion, and we're seeing not only the prophetic word and the prophets, the events speeding up, but they're gaining, speed. They're escalating, and we see it not just in isolated situations, but all over the world, in both the political and economic realm and sphere. So I just want to say, what we're going to do is, I feel I've been led to approach this from both being Jewish, as a Jew, as son or daughter of Abraham, and I'm also going to approach this from the perspective of what Rabbi Shaul says, that God's interested not in a physical circumcision, but in the circumcision of our hearts. Because if our hearts aren't circumcised, we certainly aren't driven and moved to really embrace and see the spirit of the Torah, the spirit of what God is saying. And that, in how we treat our neighbors, and how we interact with people of different faiths and different understanding, raised in different religions. Because in Yehovah's eyes, there is no religion. It's not about being a Buddhist or a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim. God sees the world as many nations that represent His creation and His purposes for His endeavors. It's His design. It's His plan. And wherever we find ourselves at this point and place in time, the world events are going to move all peoples, all nations, and all tribes to choose either their indoctrinated, influenced, raised up in mindset and vision of what is coming and what will be, and all the events of God revealing Himself and presenting Himself to the nations. You're going to have to choose. Whoever you are, wherever you are. And everything else from this time and past, what we've learned and been exposed to is really, it's gonna be meaningless. Because what the great architect and master designer of the universe has laid out in His will and His plan for mankind, for humankind who is created in His image to reflect Him, His will be done. No matter how you look at it, no matter where you're from, it's going to be His way. He's given mankind a period of time to basically awaken and come to his senses about who mankind is, where his heart's at, and what he needs to do, and what he needs to come to the realization of to embrace the Creator of the universe. And I think the thread from Genesis to Revelation reflects that thread being woven through all peoples and cultures. You had Babylon. You had Egypt. You had Persia. We've had the scope of the surrounding nations in the Middle East. You have the conquest of England and the Alexander the Greats and the Hammurabis, and of course the actions of America and the forming of that. All part of God's plan. All in the course of time to bring the world and humankind to the place that they must choose to reorient their thinking, to move from the secure place of being indoctrinated and told this is the way it is, and going to have to be educated, because we're going to see God. He's going to reveal Himself just as He did when we were delivered out of Egypt. And just as the other nations, the Goyim, which Goyim means the nations, it has a peculiar sound to it. You're a Goyim? I'm not a Goyim. Don't call me a Goyim. Now we say a Gentile, or we say pagans. But the reality is that God is interested in the nations. He created fundamentally 70 of them for a reason. And one of them happens to be Israel. Why? Because Abraham, by his faith and trust in God, God counted that to him because he believed as righteousness. And every step along the way, as we read in Bereshit, Abraham was faithful to trusting God, no matter what. And I'm sure they thought he was a little missing a few when he offered up his son as a sacrifice on Mount Moriah. Think about it. That was reflective of what the pagan cultures did. But God had a better plan. It was to be a reflection and imaging of what was to come. And Abraham, because of his obedience, became a part of making that shadow, that prophetic imagery, possible to be seen and understood by all the nations. And for a time, as Jews, because we didn't trust the descendants of Abraham, didn't walk the same path of trusting and believing and obeying what God was really saying, the spirit of the Torah. We're as gifted as we are with intellectualism and academic prowess and inventions and discovery, we had to see it to believe it. I don't know. Maybe all Jews are from Missouri. I don't know. Maybe there's a little hidden secret there. The show me state. I believe you, but you got to show me, right? So, but that's all part of God's plan. And so we see in Shemot that plan thrust forth into the experience, the life cycle, how should I say, the fiber of many peoples being delivered out of Egypt. We know that it wasn't just the Hebrews that were delivered out of Egypt. That was the motivation of God, his purpose, all part of his plan, going all the way back to Abraham. He said, your people will dwell there in Mitzrayim for 400 some years, and then I'm going to deliver them out. But little did Abraham probably think that it wasn't just for the Jews, for the Hebrews, that it was for all peoples, because Egypt was a hotbed of many peoples from all the nations in that Mesopotamia, basically, that believed in many different gods, many different religions, many different impressions and ideas of who God was and is. But remember, salvation comes through the Hebrews. Okay? Very interesting, because we see an example, a shadow, that the motivation of Yehovah was to deliver not just the Hebrews, but the nations. And that's why in Shemot, Exodus 12, verse 38, it says, the people of Israel traveled from Ramses to Sukkot, some 600,000 men on foot, not counting children. They say that might have been around between 1.5 and 2.5 million people. A mixed crowd also went up with them. Well, who's that mixed crowd? The nations. The many diverse ethnic peoples. Pagans, in the broad sense of the category, they believed in many gods. They didn't believe in the God of Israel, the God of Abraham. El Elyon, but they knew there was an El Elyon, the Most High God above all other gods in a polytheistic culture. Okay? Meaning many gods. And so we see that a mixed crowd also went up with them. Now, what is that word in the Hebrew, a mixed crowd? And you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with Vyikra, Leviticus? The word is mereb, or evening or dusk. And its meaning, mereb, means Arabia, mingled people, a mixed multitude. It's a people that are made up of many basic people, just like our world is today. Okay? I'm German and Irish. And some other things, which I won't go into, but a little bit here, a little bit there. I mean, I look at my DNA, tab of all the countries that filtered into who I am and where I am today, just as he does with Jose, with you and your family, and you and your families. We are actually, what's the word? Mutts. I mean, really, when you think about it, and there's something very unique to that, because, you see, to be a Jew has nothing to do with your ethnic origin. It doesn't really have anything to do, in a sense, of where you were born and where you grew up. You see, the uniqueness about Judaism is that it is a lifestyle. A lifestyle designed and made by the creator of the universe. And that lifestyle is contained in the Torah. And it just so happens that the descendants of Abraham are the ones that embraced it at the very Exodus into the wilderness. Moses brought it forth, and we very, very, I don't know what the word is I want to use. It was, we were challenged, let's put it that way. We got a little bit too sidetracked by a golden calf, and a lot of, egotistical and prideful assumptions that, we could do better than Moses, and we're no different than Moses, and God said, you got it wrong. I appointed him and called him to bring forth my word and my message of what it means to reflect and image me, the creator of the universe. You see, Abraham reflected Yehovah in his walk of faith and trust, and not knowing the outcome, but trusting in God and continuing to walk forward hand in hand with him, to ultimately God identified Abraham as, you're my friend. What majesty, what beauty that Abraham touched the heart of God, just like King David, to where God said, you're my friend. You're a man after my own heart. That's what God is looking for in a Jew. We didn't do real well. And Moses told us we wouldn't. But in the scheme of things, you see, mereb is a mixture of peoples, a Mongol race, mingled people. It's an intermeddle with and mingle self-occupied. It's a prime root to intermix, technically. Okay. In the Torah, the principle, what I want to really segue into here is that when the mixed multitude entered into the wilderness, that was the beginning of God revealing himself to not just the Hebrews, but to the nations. That was the beginning that the Jews would be a light to the nations. What's a light? It's an unveiling, a revealing, a shining the light in a understanding that's darkened or not aware of. But we would be a light to the nations because we were to reflect the image of the great light, which is Yehovah. He's the light of the world. We reflected him in our lifestyle because we were different than all the other nations. And what a laboratory to be in with a mixed multitude to see the devotion of the Hebrew people because of what they had been through up to that point to embrace through Moshe God's ways. Because what did we say at Mount Sinai? We said, Moses, you go, you talk to God, we're going to stay here. You talk to him, and whatever he tells you, we'll do it. We'll just do it. Just go and come back and tell us what he wants us to do, and we'll do it. Well, it was a good heart, a good desire. But like anything else, we came to realize that we're broken, we're flawed, we've fallen short, and we made our mistakes along the way. And yet God persisted to use us as a light to the nations. Even so much so that through us came the Moshiach. And if you read the Talmud and the oral Torah prior to the 1400s, even our sages in places come out and say, we might have missed it. We might have missed that this man, Yeshua, was the promised one that would be like Moses. And for sure, all the requirements to have met for miracles and healing and delivering out demonic possessions, if you really study it in depth, Yeshua fulfilled all that. He did it. And so our flaws, rabbis and Pharisees and the religious community in control, short of trusting God, except one high priest wisely said, Gamaliel, when all the Pharisees and the religious community rose up to say, go after these heretics, these followers of the way of Yeshua, he said, no. We've had many Moshiachs come and go. And there will be more that will come and will pass into history. So let them be. If this man Yeshua is the promised one, the Moshiach, there's nothing you'll be able to do to stop what is happening. And history shows us that perhaps the religious community could not produce the depth and the imagery and the reflection of God's plan of being a light to the nations, and seeing that salvation came through us, which, whether we appropriated those qualities, when it says that salvation would come through, well, that only means one person has to come through Israel, through the people of Israel, through Abraham, through the descendants to David and Abraham. Just one. That's all God needed. And who was that? We'll find out when the Moshiach comes. And we'll all ask him, is this the first time you've been here or the second? And if he says the second time, maybe the scales will fall from many people's eyes and they'll wake up. God, so be it that it happens now. Now, before he comes. Because it says that when we recognize Yeshua as the Moshiach, it says that our awakening will be as life from the dead, and the nations of the world will be blessed. Now, I want to talk to other religions and people in the context of the mixed multitude to whom God was revealing himself through the Hebrews. They already had about, what was that, maybe 1,000+ years of connecting with the God of Abraham. They had already been taught and learned. So now they, the mixed multitude, being immersed within the nation, doesn't that paint an interesting picture? Jew and Gentile on the same page, one new man in Messiah, who was Yehovah, Yeshua, as what the angel told Miriam to call him. To recognize that he was and is the visible image of the invisible God. And so, I want to build a case here that, as other religions and beliefs, to become a Jew is a lifestyle. To be a Jew is a lifestyle. And that lifestyle is contained in the Torah experience. It says that in Exodus 12:49, it says, "There shall be one law for the native and for the stranger who sojourns among you." It was a shadow. The Moshiach had not come yet. The Moshiach had not offered up the new path of salvation so the nations could embrace it. But when he came, and when he was tortured, and when he laid down his life and shed his blood, he did it for mankind, for all peoples and all nations. And the atoning sacrifice was for past, present, and future sin, rebellion, and disobedience to Yehovah, to the Creator. That opened the door for us, all peoples, to enter in and have access to a personal relationship with the Creator. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. What is the truth? The Torah. What is the Spirit? We all have ohels, which is a tent that covers our spirit, that our spirit abides in. And when we communicate with Yehovah, it's a spiritual, not visible. We happen to be, but our spirits commune with Him. He speaks to us with a still, small voice. And we draw on the knowledge and immersion of our lives of hearing Him by immersing our mind and our emotions and our spirit in the Torah. And when you do that, you're living a Jewish lifestyle. Now, as in any other religion, man makes up his tradition, makes his own kind of unique ways to do something or express it. Nothing wrong with that. But sometimes man begins to build structures and boundaries around things that God never intended to be built, that aren't even in the Torah. And then we use it as a yoke and a weight to put on people to make it harder to reach out and relate to God. They think, if I didn't do this, 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 and this, God doesn't accept me. God doesn't listen to me. God doesn't hear me. I can't connect with Him. Well, it's because mankind made up all these traditions that keep you from the fundamental simplicity of what God is saying in the Torah. It's the attitude of your heart that matters. What is your attitudes towards your neighbor, towards life? That's what matters. And that's how you apply the meaning of the Torah to act it out, to walk it out. God's not a tyrant. He's not a dictator. He is not someone that's waiting there to say, well, you didn't do that. Oh, you didn't do it perfectly. No. I don't know anybody in the scriptures that did it perfectly. None of them. They all fell short. But God said, I have not dealt with you according to your transgressions. Let me ask you a simple question. If you have children or had children, did you deal with them according to their imperfections? Or did you have a heart of mercy and compassion and grace and bidding them along when they were little? Pat them on the butt, say, okay, come on, we'll get this right. It's okay. Now, what do you think you could have done? Or how do you think you should have handled that? And let's just remember and learn that for next time. Okay? But we get so caught up in legalism and perfection. God's not looking for perfection. It says, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. That word does not mean what it means in our version of the English language. Perfection really means whole. This book, this Siddur has, I don't know, let's just say 200 pages. Oops. Okay. Now, if it only had 150, it wouldn't be perfect. It would be incomplete. It would not be whole unless all 200 pages that were designed to be in this Siddur we're all here, then it's whole. Might be a smudge here and a smudge there. Might have missed a period somewhere, or a comma, or maybe a misspelling. But guess what? It's whole. That's what God is looking for in us. Be whole. Well, how do you be whole? By the Torah. As you immerse yourself in it, it's kind of like word perfect, where it goes in and it corrects the misspellings, the bad punctuations and whatnot. And over time, it makes you whole, complete. Excuse me 1 second. My power line just fell off from my laptop. Let me grab it. Ugh. 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 Got a little, there we go. Okay, we're connected. Okay, so what I want to point out here is, can you see the unfolding of God's plan in the wilderness, and even here in Vyikra 24:22. It says, "You shall have one manner of law as well for the stranger as for one of your own country, for I am the Lord your God." And in Numbers 15, which we'll get to as we continue on, verse 15, 16, "As for the assembly, there shall be one statute for you, and for the alien who sojourns with you, a perpetual statute throughout your generations. As you are, so shall the alien be before Yehovah. One law, one ordinance shall be for you, and for the stranger who sojourns with you." Well, when they were all in the wilderness, they were sojourning with the Hebrews. Was that in the state of Israel that they were sojourning? No. No. But the wilderness to them was their world. And they were sojourning with God's people. The apple of his eye. The pupil through which God views the whole world, the nations. Is Israel part of the nations? Absolutely. Well, that's the world. And are all the nations in the world? Absolutely. So, to embrace and live a lifestyle of being Jewish, that happens. What is the key element that brings you in to the family of God? Both for Jews and Gentiles, it's acknowledging the Moshiach. Because without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness of sin, of missing the mark, the target. And what's the target? To reflect Yehovah, because we are created in his image. We are to image him, just as the moon reflects the sun. It waxes and it wanes. We wax and we wane. We're up, we're down. We're bright, we're dull. We have our moments. That's life. But try to view this beyond what you've been indoctrinated with, and expand your perspective a little bit and realize that this is God's world. And the Jews are appointed by God, the Creator, to be a light to the nations. As Israel, the Hebrews, were a light to the sojourners and the strangers. And those that chose to embrace and seek out the Torah, to learn it, to immerse themselves in it, I just say it's a matter of time where without even having to officially, their lifestyle will illustrate that they are really, as Paul says, there's no distinction between Jew and Gentile. What matters is a circumcised heart. And if your heart is circumcised, you're going to want to immerse yourself in the Torah. You're going to want to know God's ways, because that's what they are. Not twisted and contorted and interpreted from 2026, but from its origin, from its base. And as Martin Luther King said, no, Martin Luther, I always get that mixed up, but Martin Luther, when he bifurcated from the Catholic Church, he basically immersed himself in Hebrew, learned it in depth, and he said, if you don't know Hebrew, you really can't understand the proper application and interpretation of what's being said in the Gospels and the Epistles, or even reading what they call the Old Testament. He said, Hebrew, the language, the people, the culture, is the spring from which flows the river of knowledge. It comes from the spring, flows out, creates a stream. As most rivers at their origin, don't they bubble up from a spring under the ground? And tributaries feed into that stream. But, so you have Hebrew language as the spring. The water flows out, creates a stream, and Greek is like the stream. And there's much value in the Greek language that affords itself to do some very good creative things, but you always need to go back to the Hebrew to kind of get a fuller, deeper understanding. All the other translations, as Martin Luther said, Hebrew's the spring, Greek's the stream, and everything else, every other translation, are puddles. Now, there was a very educated, knowledgeable man. He lived it in seeing what transpired in the leadership of the Catholic Church and how the Latin and the Greek were somehow just not fully adequate to express what God is trying to say to mankind. And in any religion, politics, power, control, it all plays in. And men lose sight. As a matter of fact, Ezekiel talks about the shepherds that God is going to discipline because they are not leading the people the way God instructed them to do in the Torah. Not one jot or tittle shall be changed from my word. Do it all the time. Don't they? They have so drifted. We just, as human nature, we have that potential that just as we have an evil inclination and the capacity to do good. So we always have to be diligent in guarding ourselves in how we allow things to progress and move within the context of God's ways, the Torah. And so, what I want to do is, I just, those of you who are on YouTube and listening, what I'm trying to point out here is that God's called you just as much to become a part of the nation of Israel. It's a lifestyle. David Ben-Gurion had a little bit of a conflict with the Jewish rabbis in the different sects when Israel became a nation, because they said they got to be Jewish in order to become a citizen of Israel. And David Ben-Gurion says, what are you doing? Here's a man trying to control everything, and it has its value, no doubt about it, but David Ben-Gurion put it down in the, I'd say, where the rubber meets the road. And he said, listen, if somebody wants to come here and live in Israel and comply with the lifestyle of being a Jew, they got to be crazy. Because we've been chased all over the world because of our lifestyle and our beliefs. We have our own calendar separate from the world. We observe different days. David Ben-Gurion just said, if they want to live here and be a part of our culture and our people, they just made themselves vulnerable, as the rest of the nation is vulnerable to persecution and attack. So I say to you, as I try to move along here, as we see in Emor and Bahar and Bukot Kote, in chapter 23, in Emor, we see God outlining the feasts and the festivals. And I think we need to understand the progression of how we got to this place so we can understand why it's up to us to step outside of it, away from our indoctrination, educate ourselves in God's ways, in the ways of the Torah, which happens to be the culture and lifestyle of the Jews. That's who God chose to express himself through, because of Abraham. All the other nations at that time in the ancient world, God approached them, but they weren't interested in following the Torah. Here we are today. God's made salvation available to all peoples, nations, and tribes. They're invited to come in. Yeshua said, I have not come to destroy the Torah. As a matter of fact, he was probably the most Torah-observant Jew in his day. From being kosher, to following all the feasts and the festivals, counting the Emor, and there's even some parallel, which some point maybe I'll be able to share with you, where Yeshua, which is the first fruit of the resurrection, where he literally, when he appeared after his resurrection, he literally, during the 50 days that he was back on the earth, he was literally observing the Emor and counting the Emor by the events that took place that he participated in, revealing himself as the risen Moshiach. Very interesting. Not the way we do it, but reflective of the same elements that prove by his actions, by the substance, the concrete results. And so, really, as Jews, the original Judaism was Mosaic Judaism, which was basically following out the Torah with the tabernacle, the temple, everything. The written words, the 613 mitzvahs, the feasts and the festivals. But something happened. The destruction of the temple in 70 AD. That changed everything. Because the routine, the ritual, the ability to express the Torah in the way that we understood was removed from us. I find it very interesting that Yeshua, who was talking about his body, the temple. Isn't this interesting? And I find it very interesting in Gematria that Aharon, his Gematric value for his name, and the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark, they're the same number. Because God was trying to mirror and shadow to Aharon that just as the Mishkan is the temple where the presence of God dwells in the Holy of Holies, God so also wanted to dwell in Aharon and all his people, all God's people. He wants to dwell in our ohel, our tent, and be present with us. Our bodies are the temple of the presence of the Spirit of God. That's why it says, those who worship me will worship me in spirit and in truth, because it's the Spirit that connects. We came into this world as spirits and will return to the presence of Yehovah in spirit with a resurrected body. And Jews believed in resurrection. You see, after the destruction of the temple, isn't it interesting? Yeshua said, destroy this temple in 3 days, I'll build it back up. They were very concrete in their thinking. They hadn't made that connection in Gematria of how Aaron, God wants to dwell in you, the Spirit of God, and the Holy of Holies. It's a concrete picture of an abstract manifestation that God wanted us to see. And then Yeshua used the same thing when he said, tear this temple down. They thought he was talking about the temple. Interesting, by 70 AD it was torn down, but those that believed in Yeshua, their temple remained. And the presence of Yehovah was resident in their inner man, that Holy of Holies place, where God desires to dwell in all of you. Because we each have a spot in us that's empty, that's void, that's restless, that is seeking to be filled by something we can't even describe, because it's spiritual, but it's an aching, a need of something that goes beyond the physical qualities of us being confined to the physical world. And it doesn't go away. It ebbs and flows. we have emotions, we have intellects, we have mind, and we have a spirit. When you don't nurture the spirit with the very things that God created it to be nurtured with, we get restless. And we don't even know that what we're missing is the Torah. We don't even realize that what we're missing is being immersed in the very words of God, because He is the words. When we ingest and take hold of the very words, we're partaking of His Spirit. As I said, Yeshua is the visible image of the invisible God. He's the essence, the perfect, complete, concentrate essence of who God is was imputed into Yeshua, that child. And as he grew and developed, that grew and developed. Part divine, God, and part man, the Moshiach. But what took place after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD is that there was this Council of Jamnia in 90 AD, which is disputable, the seriousness and the depth of it, and it certainly didn't live up to what in the Christian world is the Council of Nicaea. It didn't meet that level of review and canonizing the word. But what happened is Judaism kind of fell back into Talmudic Judaism. You have the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud. And those things which were made up of the thoughts of men, the intellect of men, which is really no different than the Gospels and Epistles, were written by men. They're interpreting the very actions of Yeshua and what they observed. Very different from the Torah, because Moshe, he saw God face to face. God spoke into his ear. He was in the presence of the Holy One. So from Yehovah's mouth to Moshe's ear, to Moshe's hand, writing it down, Moshe was acting as a transcriber, a transcriptionist of the very creator of the universe. When you think about it, he was there listening to Yehovah and writing down everything he said. What was that again? I missed it. You know, I didn't quite hear that word. Could you repeat that, please? So tell me, what is more powerful? What is more pure? From God's mouth to Moses' ear to the written word in the Torah? Or men like you and me who had an experience, who experienced the indwelling of the Spirit of God, but the reality is there's mixture there because we're human. And our ability to clearly process and lay out is limited. And so some of us gets into it. Just like as I'm teaching this, some of me is getting into what I'm speaking because I'm not perfect. My knowledge is not perfect. My memory recall is not perfect. It's just like history books. Perfect example. History is not really that accurate. Do you know that? They only really find and gather the evidence and the parts that really describe about 20% of the real facts. 80% of it is conjecture, is man's putting in his thoughts and reasoning and trying to assemble what makes sense. So, this is my opinion. I think that's what's happened in our traditional religions. God's capable of bringing the truth through, and we're capable of skewing it because we're imperfect. That's why we need to be in a body. We need to challenge one another. And we need to study the Word. And at that time, Christianity was excelling, was growing, and Judaism was without a temple. So they had to find a way to keep the cohesiveness of the Jewish people in Judaism. And that's where the proliferation of synagogues and temples and rabbis transitioned from the Pharisaical order and of the leading the religious community to the Rabbinical. And unfortunately, as good as it's possible to be, the Rabbinical, the rabbis' interpretation and authority in expressing and explaining the Word became the authority. And his Word is greater than the written Word. Not here. No. I expect people to question me and to sit down and have a rational, civilized discussion and academic review of the issue that's in question. Just the genuine, transparent interaction with the desire of the heart to see what God says. Not what I say, not what you say, but to really be honest. And I've had that. I've had somebody draw a conclusion on Scripture about how Cain came about and from who. And it's just totally error. And I sat down with that person and went through it. What does it say? What does it say? Don't add a jot or a tittle because that's what you want to believe, or because you feel that way, or because your imagination is taking you somewhere. We are to cast down every imagination and every high thing that exalts itself above the knowledge of God and the written Word, the Torah. In that respect, I lean more towards the Karaite path. So the Pharisaical Judaism was a major Jewish movement during the Second Temple period that emphasized strict adherence to both written Mosaic law and oral traditions. They were mixing it right then. And I'm not saying there's no value in the oral Torah. Truth is truth. principle is principle, and there's things to be gained from that, and there's value there. But when it conflicts with the written word, you got to draw the line. Not one dot or one tittle is to be changed. They focused on ritual purity, and this is where Shammai and Hillel come in, and where, it's not, it's the heart of God, the attitude of our Creator, the God of mercy, grace, compassion, long-suffering, understanding. He's not ready to beat someone over the head. He's a loving Father. But what has religion done? They've presented God, whether they like it or not, because of the way they measure it out, to be a tyrant and a schoolmaster to the extent, ouch. And if you're too harsh, depending on the reed, a tender reed, God says, I will not bend and break. He's saying, my attitude towards every person is different. I'm not giving them a pass, but I got to nurture them. The Spirit of the Lord He knows where we're at. He knows how we need to be handled in order to bring us closer to Him and to transform us. It's a process. What do you think all the elements in the journey through the wilderness did to people? It wore them down. It humbled them. It hopefully got rid of the rough edges. Some it didn't. The Pharisaical Judaism focused on ritual purity, democratized religious practice beyond the temple, and believed in the resurrection of the dead. Their traditions were the precursor to the foundation of modern Rabbinical Judaism, which is what we have today. And I don't diminish the value of the education and the knowledge of the rabbis in large throughout all Judaism. They've devoted their lives, but there is indoctrination there. There is thoughts and ideas that maybe just are not lined up with the heart of God. And they got to be willing to make adjustments in your faith, whatever it is. The objective is to have relationship with the Creator of the universe and to know Him. It's a process. You got to be willing to accept the fact that you may have some skewed, distorted, misunderstood conclusions that as new information comes along, that you're willing to make an adjustment, and you make that based on recognizing in the written word the enlightenment of that, the truth, you being enlightened in a whole new level of truth and understanding that you hadn't had before, that got in the way of what God's trying to tell us in the written word. And so modern day Rabbinic Judaism is defined by belief in a single incorporeal Creator and the divine authority of both the written Torah and the oral law. Its core centers on daily prayer, ethical living, and community action, with a strong emphasis on living out the mitzvahs in the present world. The rabbis' interpretations carry more practical authority in dictating daily law and practice, while written Mosaic law is considered the divine foundation. Judaism relies on the oral law, and that's the Talmudic and Rabbinic rulings, to define, interpret, and sometimes functionally override the literal text. That is where the Karaites draw the line. The word is the written authority. And how appropriate is that statement? Because Yeshua is the written word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It's got to be the written word. Okay? Because the written Torah is often broad and lacks operational details, for example, it doesn't define what constitutes work on the Sabbath, the rabbis act as necessary authoritative arbiters. Well, come on. If you don't know what work is, you need to go into a vocabulary class and learn more words and understand the place and the purpose and the application of them. And you know what? God's personal. He'll lead you, not allow you to compromise. He knows where you're at. You know? Do I have to tell you how to live your life? I only need to encourage you to embrace the Torah. And then, when an occasion arises where we disagree, we discuss it. And if we don't agree, it's not my place. In Yochanan chapter 7, God says, don't judge your neighbor. Don't be critical of him. You're not his master. I think we have, as they say, too many chiefs and no Indians. Too many people that think they're the masters, and they haven't learned yet to be the servants that they were called in to be as a rabbi and a pastor and an elder and a leader. Serve. The Levites were called to serve the nation, the tribes. We're no different. And so, what I want to point out is what we did is we rejected the Apocrypha to find a smaller canon that excluded the deuterocanonical text or the Apocrypha. We established clearer boundaries against growing Christian sects, which was relying heavily on the Greek Septuagint. And so all the religious leaders were trying to do, and I don't put them down for this, they were trying to preserve the Jewish people's cultural echadness. Because if all these other things came in at that time, we wouldn't have Judaism today. We wouldn't have a culture that reflects the Torah. So in many respects it's good, but I think that we've come to a point where the heart of God is saying, let a new man come forth, Jew and Gentile, one. There's only one thing we disagree on, and we ought not to focus on that. The principles in the Torah are clearly illustrated in the Gospels and the Epistles. Let's journey together, connecting them, and acknowledging when in the real world the Gospels and the Epistles were written in Hebrew, written by Jews, by Hebrews, that has been hidden. Do you think we can get together? One new man? I hope so. Part of the unfolding of that is the church and other religions. Got to understand something. The kingdom of God is coming, will come. It's the constitution that we're all going to have to live by. And that is the Torah, is the constitution of the kingdom of God. So you either learn it now, immerse yourself in it, partake of it, participate in it, grow in it, and out of that will come a reflection and imaging of what a Jew is. Isn't that interesting? You see, how do I put all my eggs in that basket? Well, it's right there in Vyikra chapter 23. It says, Adonai Yehovah said to Moshe, tell the people of Israel the designated times of Yehovah are to proclaim as holy convocations are my designated times. Not yours, mine. But you're to follow them because you're the example. Because you're the light. Because when all the nations of the world see you honoring and following my ways, the world will be transformed. So I say what Yeshua said. I did not come to destroy the Torah. I came to make it whole. See, he was the one part of the Torah that hadn't been manifested or taken place yet. He came to complete it, to make it whole. And we disparaged him. Isn't that interesting? The shadows of the journey through the wilderness for the nations. The shadow of Joseph's life being persecuted by his brothers. God's trying to speak to us. We got to let go of the old things and take hold of the imagery and the order, the plan that God is conveying to us. So, I have a lot more here, a lot more content. But what I think I'm going to do, you probably are well familiar with the 7 feasts and festivals, so I'm not going to go into them. And if we will, at some point, if you continue to subscribe and listen, we'll get to that. But it doesn't take much to do a quick search for what are the feasts and festivals of Judaism, and to do some studying on your own. But what I want to point out, and I'm just going to try to get this in yet because this is a long one. To the Gentiles, to the Goyim, I want to say that the concept of Gentiles being grafted in, when you become a believer and embrace the work, atoning grace of Yeshua, you become grafted into the commonwealth of Israel. Spiritually grafted in. Because you've been accepted by the Creator of the universe. And as Jews, we're already, the best we can, living Torah. And now you're invited in. That's the first thing that was taught when the first Gentile believers came in to accepting Yeshua as their atonement. Hasn't changed. You should be learning Moses, which is the Torah. And how beautiful the connection to the Gospels and the Epistles, because they're all rooted and grounded in the Torah. Some close to verbatim. And if you don't know what those are, you're missing out. You see, the Gentiles were grafted in. They are the wild olive branch that is grafted into the natural olive tree, which motivates the reproduction qualities of the sap and the deepening of the roots of the tree to come alive and produce at a greater rate than if it just stood by itself. So I say to Israel, it's time. It's time to take hold of the wild olive branches and allow Yehovah to graft them in to the natural olive tree of Judaism in the context of recognizing the atoning work of Yeshua, a Jew, the Messiah, the Moshiach. And when we do that, the world will be transformed. We can't stick within the boundaries of our own comfortable culture and religion. We were called to be a light to the nations, to bring them in. So I asked, did they stumble in order, meaning the Jews, this is Paul, did they stumble in order that they might fall? By no means. Rather, through their trespass, salvation has come to the Gentiles, the Goyim, so as to make Israel jealous. Are you jealous, Israel? Because for some reason the Gentiles are embracing the Torah. It's become a big thing. It's amazing. What are they doing following our feasts and festivals? Well, they're not our feasts and festivals. They're God's. He said it in Vyikra 23. Wake up. It's for all the nations. Why do you think when the Moshiach comes or returns that all the nations are to come to Jerusalem for certain feasts and festivals? And if they don't, their land is going to be in a drought. So, salvation has come to the Gentiles so as to make Israel jealous. Now, if their trespass means riches for the world, and if their failure in trusting means riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their full inclusion mean? Now, I'm speaking to Gentiles, inasmuch then as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry in order to somehow make my fellow Jews jealous, and thus save some of them. For if their rejection means the reconciliation of the nations, of the world, what will their acceptance mean but life from the dead? If the dough offered as the first fruit, which is Israel, is holy, so is the whole lump. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in among others, and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree, the natural olive tree, do not be arrogant towards those branches. If you are, remember, it is not you who support the root, but the root that supports you. And you will say, Branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in to the other religions. If you are, remember, it is not you who support the root, but the root that supports you. Then you will say, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. That is true. They were broken off because of their unbelief in the Moshiach, but you stand fast through faith. So do not become proud, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, neither will he spare you. Note then the kindness and severity of God. Severity to those who have fallen, but God's kindness to you, provided you continue in his kindness. Otherwise you too will be cut off. And even they, if they do not continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in. For God has the power to graft them in again. For if you were cut from what is by nature a wild olive tree and grafted, contrary to nature, into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these, the natural branches, be grafted back into their own olive tree? Scripture explicitly states that there is no distinction or no difference between Jew and Gentile, primarily in the writings of the Apostle Paul, emphasizing that all people are equal in God's sight and saved the same way. You can find that in Romans 10:12, Galatians 3:28, Colossians 3:11. There is no longer Jew or Gentile. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male and female. For all of you are one in Messiah, Yeshua. So, I'm not going to quite, I just think I've gone a little long enough now. I'm gonna just, I got to leave some of this out. But what I want to encourage you to do, if you have the complete Jewish Bible, as far as the prophetic message in Vyikra, chapter 26, the whole chapter, read it. Because the things for those who do not embrace the Torah, Jew and Gentile, Christian or Jew, whatever you associate with, God is going to carry out the elements of discipline on all of us. And when you see the consequences of these disciplines that he is going to mete out upon those who don't honor the Torah. I don't know about you, but I read it, and it's like a roadmap to where we are in the world right now. All the calamities, the drought, we're in the midst of a distribution of goods, fertilizer, oil, you name it. If you only understood all the elements that are in the supply chain that are being disrupted. Cuba just ran out of oil. They have no lights. They have no electricity. There's other places where their supplies are being diminished, and it's creating a desperate situation. I wonder why. Read chapter 26. Because the Western world fundamentally has embraced the fundamental principles of the Torah that are illustrated in the Gospels and Epistles. They just don't know where they line up with the Torah. But the same warnings exist. When we change a dot and a tittle and make it our way and not the way it's written in the Torah, we're not following God. We're following ourselves. And so, you see, I'm going to close with what the end of chapter 26 in Vyikra says. It says, because we talked about a circumcised heart and an uncircumcised heart. But if their uncircumcised hearts will grow humble. Notice, God identified the hearts of the Jews and the sojourners and the strangers, the whole multitude. But if their uncircumcised hearts will grow humble. Folks, there was uncircumcised hearts back then, and they're present today in all religions. And they are paid the punishment for their misdeeds. Verse 42 and on. Then I will remember my covenant with Yaakov, also my covenant with Yitzhak, and my covenant with Abraham. And I will remember the land. For the land will lie abandoned without them, and it will be paid its Shabbats while it lies desolate without them. And they will be paid the punishment for their misdeeds, because they rejected my rulings, my Torah, and loathed my regulations, and loathed my Torah. Yet, in spite of all that, I will not reject them. God of mercy, grace, and compassion. When they are in the lands of their enemies, I will not reject them, nor will I loathe them to the point of utterly destroying them, and thus break my covenant with them, because I am Yehovah, their Elohim. Rather, for their sakes, I will remember the covenant of their ancestors, whom I brought out of the land of Mitzrayim, Egypt, with the nations watching, so that I might be their God. I am Yehovah. These are the laws, rulings, and teachings that Yehovah himself gave to the people of Israel on Mount Sinai through Moshe. Interesting. And I'm going to give you an actual, physical, factual manifestation of Revelation 16:12. The drying up of the Euphrates River in the end of days is specifically prophesied. Well, it wasn't like that 100 years ago. So where are we today? The prophecy is part of the bowl judgments in the book of Revelation, which are described as the final plagues sent upon the earth. And as it is written in Revelation 16:12, the drying up of the Euphrates River in the end of days is prophesied. And here it is. The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates. Well, folks, if the Euphrates is drying up now, and you can go online, I'm going to put up links on my YouTube video that I'm going to put up of where it's so obvious this scripture is being manifested in completeness, and it's the sixth angel pouring out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up. Why? To prepare the way for the kings from the east. That will, in apocalyptic theology, the river has long stood as a massive natural boundary into the land of the boundaries of Israel. Its drying is meant to clear an unobstructed path for an invading eastern army to march westward towards the land of Armageddon and Megiddo. Isn't that interesting? Well, read Leviticus chapter 26. And what God does to discipline The nations, Israel, the strangers, the sojourners, because they were there in the Exodus, and he refers to their ancient ancestors. I will remember the covenant of their ancestors whom I brought out of the land of Egypt, with the nations watching. The strangers, sojourners, and foreigners were included in the covenant that Moses gave out as a shadow of becoming a believer and embracing the atoning grace of Yeshua, being grafted in to the natural olive tree, being grafted into the commonwealth of Israel. You should look like Israel. Your culture, it's a lifestyle. It's not a religion. It's not an ethnic group. Even though there are those that are physical, genetic descendants, it's a way of life. And the only way you acquire that is believing in Yeshua and the atoning act he did by shedding his blood for the forgiveness of mankind's sin, past, present, and future. You then become a part of the Commonwealth of Israel. And it's up to you to walk out a Jewish lifestyle. You have a husband and a wife, they blend over time. They remain having their uniqueness as a man and a woman, but they blend together and become united as one new entity, one new man. That's where we're headed, and God's bringing to bear the bowls, and the angels are releasing. I want to encourage you to check out sightedmoon.com with Brother Joseph Dumont. He has clearly identified what's going on right now and the progression that we're going to see. So, thank you. I wish I could have done a little better, because there's things that I just isn't enough time. I mean, it's going to be an hour and 45-minute message. I don't know how many people are going to sit and listen to it that long, but we'll see. So, Yehovah, the peace of Yehovah, which passes all understanding, guard your heart and your minds in Messiah Yeshua. And may the Lord Yehovah bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May he lift up his countenance upon you and give you his shalom. Shabbat shalom. This is Rabbi Moshe from Beit Torah in Schnecksville, Pennsylvania. On my YouTube channel, The Straight and Narrow Way. I'll post this today, and we've added some new elements to help us, and that is we have a PayPal, a QR code, and soon to be, I think it's called Cash App. But to make it easier for you, I'm old school, and I just put a note up there that if you're blessed, if you're ministered to, if you've acquired a blessing in this message, that you consider us, help us with our needs as a ministry, as Beit Torah, to pay our bills. We rely on our brothers and sisters in the Lord. It's that simple. And don't muzzle the ox while he's treading out the field, and the laborer is worthy of his hire. So if you've benefited, we ask that if the Spirit of God moves you, be gracious and support what we're doing here. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom. And come and visit us. Email us. Be glad to interact with you. We're small. We have anywhere from 2 to maybe 7, maybe more. It just depends on what's going on. It doesn't seem like people like to go and sit and listen to someone for an hour and 45 minutes. But, yeah, well. Shabbat Shalom. Shavua Tov. Thank you.
My servant, hear now, O Israel. It was I who made you, formed you.